Hey everyone, I hope you're all staying safe at home during the quarantine. Today I'm going to be presenting on holidays in art in medieval Europe. Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day's origins are a bit unclear. The Catholic Church recognizes three Saint Valentines, and several stories exist, but I couldn't find the stories for the third Saint Valentine. One tells of a Saint Valentines that married young couples in secret when Emperor Claudius II banned marriages for young men. He would later be killed. Another story tells of a Saint Valentines that helped Christians escape brutal Roman prisons and that he sent his first Saint Valentines. Later Pope Gelasius would name February 14th Valentine's Day. In medieval Europe, especially England and France, February 14th was believed to be the start of the birds' mating seasons, giving the idea of romance. Geoffrey Chaucer first mentioned this in his works, quote, "For this was sent on St. Valentine's Day, when every fowl cometh there to choose his mate." Starting in the 1400s, people in medieval Europe started to celebrate Valentine's Day by writing Valentines, a famous one being written by the Duke of Orleans in 1415 after being imprisoned in the Tower of London. The week of Easter and after. During the week, people will attend services called Tenebrae, which is Latin for darkness, from Wednesday onwards. The service itself was dark, having at times only one candle to light the place. The Thursday service was a solemn one, and Good Friday was a mournful one. Easter services started at dawn with hymns. After fasting, they would feast a lot. People also received new clothes from lord to vassal. Eggs were banned during fasting, so when they were laid, they would be boiled to be preserved, and when fasting was over, they would be eaten or hidden to be found, giving rise to the Easter egg tradition. Eggs were hidden to teach the disciples finding the risen Christ. They might also be painted too. The Monday following the days of the fast was Hawk Monday, in which young women would capture the young men, who would be released only by a ransom of church donations. The very next day was a Hawk Tuesday, and it was the same thing except the roles were reversed. Christmas. Some of the traditions today stem from the medieval times. Caroling today resulted from carolers being banned from services because they were disruptive, so they would instead go around the streets caroling. The crib was also introduced in this time in 1223 by St. Francis of Assisi instead of a manger to help explain the story. A few days after the Christmas was Childrenmas, or Holy Innocents' Day. It was customary to have a boy run the town for one day. Children were also beaten to remind them of Harold's cruelty. The rich people would eat goose and maybe swan to celebrate Christmas. They would only eat swan if they had permission from the king, or their lord. If the poor had some money, they could buy raw or cooked goose from the church. Mince pie was also popular. In the countryside, there was a practice of killing wild boars and cutting their head off and offering them to the farming goddess. Christmas Day was also a date for the poor to pay rent. Art in medieval Europe. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Western Europe underwent the Dark Ages. Few recorded pieces of art survived. For part of the Middle Ages, Byzantine Empire still flourished, and still contributes much of their culture during this time. Wealthy and influential people or members of the society would commission artists to create art, architecture, manuscript, and churches, and etc. There are several different periods of art during the Middle Ages. Romanesque. This art period was at its height between 1075 and 1125 AD in Western Europe. This name is a reference to a mix of Roman and several other influences, including the Carolingians, the Ottonians, the Byzantines, and etc. This style of art was very spiritualized since Europe was a very religious place at the time. Projects often have values like transcendence. This contrasts with the natural and human values apparent in the later Gothic style. This was the first international art period following the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Most of the art were produced in monasteries. During this period, sculptures became popular. Biblical stories and doctrines were carved onto columns and doors of churches. Natural objects were distorted and stylized to represent them being freely transformed inside the artist's minds. Churches at this time were built like those of Christian Rome, utilizing trusses and buttresses. Early Romanesque roofs were wood and later became stone. Roofs were often built with semicircles called barrel vaults and later cross vaults. Here we have examples of barrel vaults and cross vaults. On the left we have the Gloucester Cathedral from England, and you can see the cross vaults on the top. On the right we have barrel vaults from buildings in a place in Spain called Aranjuez. The Gothic Style. This style followed the Romanesque style and has nothing to do with Goths. It was used as a derogatory term by people in and after the Renaissance, who attribute it to the barbaric Gothic tribes that invaded Rome. They used this all the way up to, I think, the 1800s. This came to be because medieval masons needed to find ways to support heavy roofs. Barrel and cross vaults were very heavy and exerted outward pressures on the walls, so walls had to be extremely thick. A new rib vault was created to combat the problem. They were less stressful to hold, and flying buttresses were also introduced. They helped fight against the outward pressures the vault exerted, resulting in bigger and taller buildings. Sculptures also remained popular during this time, although they were mostly for adding designs to buildings. Figures of saints and Jesus and his family were decorated in doorways. Sculptures were also more relaxed and natural. Paintings followed suit with the changes. Emphasis were placed on flowing and curving lines and attention to detail. Composition became more complex. Painters tried to add depth to the painting. Subjects of most paintings were biblical, although they may also include hunting, chivalric scenes, and historical events. Here we have an example of the Romanesque style compared to the Gothic style. On the left, you can see that the Gothic style, there's much more detail, so you can pick out their clothes more easily. It looks very natural, whereas on the right, it doesn't look very well-rounded. The Byzantine style. This art period started around the 4th century all the way up to the 15th century AD. Around the 12th century, this period began producing very expressive art with lots of imagination. Bright stones, gold mosaics, and precious metal would be used to decorate buildings and items like books. Walls were also painted very brightly. Because the Byzantine Empire was the eastern part of the Roman Empire, much of its art were very Roman, especially the early days after the split. Sources also say that art in this period had much Greek influences. Icons, or little pictures that represent a saint or holy figures, were very prominent. They were always full frontal view, either with full body or just head to shoulder. They're usually seen on mosaics, wall paintings, and small artworks made from precious metal, or they could be made onto wooden panels by mixing colors with wax, then burning them onto wooden panels. Mosaics were very common as well. Most of what we have left are religious and found in church buildings. A famous example are ones found in Hagia Sophia. Other subjects of mosaics include daily life and remnants of pagan culture. Here's an example of a mosaic. I have one on the previous slide as well, but in case someone doesn't know, and I had to search this up too, a mosaic is a picture or pattern created by using smaller pieces of different materials like glass or stone or tile.